Welcome to Troweling Down, Biblical Archaeology for the 21st Century. Hi, I'm Gary Byers, and this is our resident rock salt star today, Dr. Stephen Collins. And we are in the ARC, the Archaeological Research Center of the el-Hammam excavation project. And this is our pottery. Welcome to our pottery lab. We have got stuff spread all over the room. And we're going through our pottery that we've excavated over the last 15 seasons. You can see it up, circle the wall all the way around the room. And this is what we found. Over 1,100 sherds that have been registered. Probably
11,000
sherds that have been registered.
11,000 diagnostic sherds. And of course, for every one we save, we probably toss 10 into our pottery dump in Jordan. These are the ones that we say are representative of the ceramic assemblages for each of the archaeological periods represented at the site.
So this is our baby, our pride and joy. This is what archaeologists live off of, and we're having fun with it every day. We're finding something new, reminding us of something. Connecting things that we had never been able to connect before. Just amazing
And
stuff.
pottery can be ugly.
Aww.
It can be ugly, or it can be really beautiful.
That is just gorgeous, isn't it?
So we have it all.
We do. Well, today we want to focus on some special pottery. When we first started excavating the site at el-Hammam in the Jordan River Valley, just 8 miles north of the Dead Sea, 8 miles east of the Jordan River. Big site, 64 acres. When we started excavating, one of the things we noticed was schmutz on our pottery that we're not been used to in other places we've excavated.
Yeah,
and
not only that, but remember, sometimes because we excavate in more or less in the winter.
Yes, we do.
Because we're 500 feet below sea level at the excavation site. So it's really warm down there in the valley, kind of subtropical almost. So even though it might be snowing in Amman, you'd be shirt sleeve weather down in the valley.
Absolutely.
And so we would notice that when we get a periodic rain during the excavation season, overnight or in a couple of days, it would dry up. And we would walk across the lower tell where we were excavating at the time. And when it dried up, the ground turned white.
Manna.
Yeah, and the ground would turn white, and you would walk across what otherwise looked like just soil with some white crystally stuff on it, and your feet would go crunch, crunch, crunch. It sounded like walking on sort of frozen snow, and it was always kind of odd. What is all this salt doing here on this part of the city?
Yeah, that's true. That was a regular deal. And it turns out it was related to the soil. So I've got a piece here. This is a handle from the Bronze Age. And you can see on this piece, now this handle has a fold up. Here's the body of the vessel here. And then this handle folds up, and it was call it a horizontal handle. You'd have two of them on a vessel. And this is typical of what we find. Now, probably one out of 20 or 30 vessels had this on them, but this stuff is encrusted. And when we first started, we would say to the people that are washing our pottery, take this back and wash it. It's not right. Well, they come back and said, well, you wash it because it ain't coming off. And it doesn't. This stuff is just melted on there. It's just stuck forever. So this is just a real small little piece, an example, and we've got some really cool examples that you've got on your tray over there. So show us these and talk to us a little bit about it.
And it's not so much specific because we have to sort of explain that el-Hammam, the site that we believe is biblical Sodom, is a continuously occupied site going way back thousands of years before its destruction.
And the Bible goes back to Genesis chapter 10.
Yes, which would be the early Bronze Age. Yeah. And so we have the Chalcolithic period, the early Bronze Age, the intermediate Bronze Age, all the way down through the middle Bronze Age. So several thousand years of occupation at the site, unbroken. And what's interesting is that we get a lot of, therefore, mixing of pottery.
Yeah.
We have older pottery. It's probably a lot of heirlooms being continuously redone and reused, and old forms being remade. And also, even in the houses, we will have an early Bronze Age house refurbished in the intermediate Bronze Age, refurbished again in the Middle Bronze Age, and who knows how many times in between. But sometimes they raise the floors a bit, replaster, so you might have an EB3 wall with an intermediate Bronze Age set of a few courses of new brick plastered in the Middle Bronze Age and being lived in still in the Middle Bronze Age. And so we find sherds from all periods. And so when we talk about these salt incrustations on the pottery, it's not just one period. It's pretty much everything that's in the soil. It seems like the soil, the layers from above became saltier and saltier and saltier by precipitating down. And as that salt precipitates down into the soil from the top layer, now we know where it comes from. We know it comes from the top layer, from the Middle Bronze Age layer. But it has seeped down into, with the rainfall, down into the lower levels. So,
and just as a reminder, that Middle Bronze Age layer was destroyed, as this scientific paper that came out a year ago talked about, in the area of Tel el-Hammam. A meteoric airburst brought destruction to the city, and one of the things that seems to have happened is dead seawater probably was vaporized and put all around the area. So that destruction, not the Bible says fire and brimstone from heaven. It doesn't say salt from heaven. The salt didn't come from heaven. There's no reason for that, but it did probably come from dead seawater that was vaporized and then spread all over that area.
and of course, the Dead Sea is directly southwest of us, and we know from not a few indicators on the site that the destruction event that took the city out was from the southwest. There's a directionality that we see in the destruction debris, in what we call the destruction matrix. And so if it comes from that direction, if that cosmic object, rock, big one, explode as it came in, heated up and exploded over the north end of the Dead Sea, the shock wave may have pushed vast amounts of superheated, vaporized, not just vaporized water, but vaporized salt.
Yes, from the Dead Sea.
Up over the landscape.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is that the site is way, way saltier than any of the surrounding terrain. Now, that's interesting because Dead Sea salt is highly soluble. Yeah. And so whatever was pushed up over the landscape itself in the rainy seasons would have eventually just washed out of the soil.
Yeah.
But farmers in some places even have to wash the soil in that area today. They have to put water on it and wash the salts out of the surface soil to be able to plant crops. But up in the city itself, which is surrounded by a vast, massive fortification system, it's like a bowl.
Yeah.
Even if it gets rained on, it can't run, it can't go anywhere. Yeah. And so the salt just sits. It just stays in the soil. It doesn't wash out of the soil. Yeah. It just stays in the soil and keeps seeping downward, downward, downward. And so that's what's happened. But the question is, where did the salt come from? Now, some people have said, well, maybe at some point the Dead Sea got, and the Dead Sea does go way high and way low historically. Maybe the Dead Sea got so high that it covered the site and put Dead Sea salt in the soil. Well, it's not geologically, it's not physically possible. I'll tell you why. If you filled the entire Jordan Valley up to the level of the Sea of Galilee in the north, in other words, if you made it all one lake, okay?
Yes.
Which we know never happened.
Right.
But if you did that, Tel el-Hammam would still be 200 feet above the water.
Interesting thought. Did you wake up at 3 a.m. and come up with that?
I just was thinking about that stuff. Well, the The Sea of Galilee is about roughly 700 feet below sea level, the surface, right? And el-Hammam is 500 feet below sea level. It's 200 feet higher. So even if you filled it up to the layer of the Sea of Galilee and made the Dead Sea and the Sea of Galilee all one big lake, el-Hammam would not be in the water. It would still be 200 feet above the water, the top of the water. So this salt may have come out of the Dead Sea, but it did not come out of the Dead Sea by way of the Dead Sea overtaking the site at any time in history.
Very good point.
It was pushed up over the site. And in fact, what you said, Gary, was interesting because let me grab a couple of these. You see this stuff? And it's a nice red burnished platter.
Yeah.
But you can see all of this incrustation. It's ashy colored because there's a lot of ash being mixed with the salt as it's being deposited. But a lot of this salt is actually it's in the condition it's in and stuck to the vessel because it was possibly some of it was molten when it was splattered on, and you can see that this really doesn't look like crystals too much.
No. We have some that does, but that doesn't. It's schmutz.
Yeah, it's just plastered on there. Here's another one. If you look at this one, now you can see some crystals forming here, but the rest of this formation looks as if it were sort of melted and plastered on there. Of course, it is salt after all, but after the fact, it can crystallize because it's going to be getting wet over and over and over again in the soil. So, but you see how that's done. But there's a lot of salt in the soil. Now, we have precipitate salts, like this one. This stuff on here, this is actually salt precipitated onto the surface of it in crystalline form.
Yeah, we get more of this, but every now and then we get stuff like that. So interesting.
Yeah. So if I'll kind of turn it, and so we get some of the shine, some of the sparkle from the salt crystals. And so you see these sharp, pointy crystals. Now, we're not talking about table salt.
No.
We're not talking about good old sodium chloride. We're talking about what some people describe as anhydride Dead Sea salt, which is a mix of different kinds of salts, gypsum, bromium, bromides, those kinds of things. So this is not salt you want to put on your mashed potatoes.
No, definitely not.
You'd get real sick if you didn't die. So it's not a good thing. But you can see that we have salt. And in fact, one place that the salt likes to go is it likes to join with and adhere to ash.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah. What did they plaster between the mud bricks in our buildings and our Bronze Age buildings? What did they plaster with?
Well, they would use mud, and they would use limestone
and ash.
And ash. Yeah,
it's
mixed with ash.
It's sort of a mud ash and sometimes lime, a mortar.
Yeah.
Well, sometimes that mortar is completely infused with this salt from the ground because, of course, the mud bricks are in the ground, and over the millennia, that salt has precipitated into it, and so that mortar becomes as hard as cement.
It is. It really is.
And so this is really, really interesting stuff. How did it get there? We only know one mechanism to do it. Something had to push Dead Sea water and salt up over the landscape, and in such quantities that it would never ever, at least on the site itself, in that bowl created by the fortifications, would never ever just precipitate out. It's so salty. So what would cause that? We think the meteoritic airburst event that destroyed 400 square kilometers of that area and all the cities located in it, including el-Hammam, But that destruction, part of the dynamics of that destructive event was in its explosive power and the concussive shock wave that pushed off in front of it, pushed vast quantities of vaporized salt and dead seawater up over the site.
Yeah. Well, pretty exciting stuff. This is all part of archaeology, and archaeologists study the pottery. But then you've got stuff on the pottery like this, and so we get other scientists to be involved and engaged with us. And of course, that's how this Airburst information came to us by way of those guys, astrophysicists and geologists. Yeah, you got a couple more here. You want to say a word about those before we go?
Yeah, and of course there is some crystallizing in here, but this looks again like the splatter patterns. And you can see, of course, this is a jar. This is the neck of a jar. And there's
so on both sides, even that's the most, but even some on the other
even
side,
some on this
the
side.
inside.
So by virtue of being in the right place or the wrong place at the right time, all of this salt is deposited over the site in the Middle Bronze Age, and then poisons the soil there afterwards.
And it would have made it hard to grow crops, and that's why the Bible seems to suggest that there was nobody there in that period when Moses and Joshua came through. And while scholars
and that's 300 years later.
Yes. That's the area where Moses and Joshua came through. Most scholars say our site was Abel Shittim in the days of Moses and Joshua and the Israelites coming through. That's pretty well established. And so why could they come through and not fight any battles? They fought before, they fought after, but they didn't fight anybody there. Why was that? Because nobody lived there.
Nobody was home, because the area had gone offline in this violent cataclysm that had occurred, and the soil, the surface soil, was probably removed in the event, and poisoned by salt. Now that would eventually regrow. I mean, the soil would come back. The nasty little plants like thorn bushes would come back first, the ones that could survive and not get all eaten off by the sheep and goats. But it took 300 years to get to the point where you could call it Abel Shittim.
Yeah.
Now, in the time of Joseph, the same area is called Abel Mitzrayim. But
Reaping of the Egyptians.
But there's another name applied to it as well. Now they call it, sometimes they translate it, the threshing floor of Atad. But threshing floor itself just simply means a flat, stony place.
Yeah.
Atad means sticker bushes. Sticker bush. Now, who named their kid sticker bush? So I don't think Atad is a person. I think Atad is a description of the landscape. It's the stony place of sticker bushes. And so they're just these little prickly, and you know the little prickly sticker bushes.
They got pricklies.
We used to have to deal with them all the time over excavating at the other side of the river.
Yeah.
And so in time, over about another couple of hundred years, it becomes acacia trees. Now, what are acacia trees?
Shittim wood, which is what the Ark of the Covenant was made from.
Right. And these are big
sticker bushes.
Sticker bushes. They're thorny.
And they are.
We go from thorn bushes to thorny trees. But that's the rebuilding of the landscape, the rebuilding of the soils on the landscape over a long period of time, and the soil is beginning to recover. And then eventually, around 1000 BC, the soils are good enough to grow barley. Now, we don't have any evidence of wheat, I don't think yet. But wheat may have come along eventually, but barley will germinate in a slightly more saline soil than will wheat. So the history of the landscape tells us that something terrible happened around the time of Abraham to destroy these cities.
And that's Tal el-Hammam in Jordan. That's where we're digging. That's where our schmutz came from. And we used to throw this away, but now we see how valuable and important it is. Hey, folks, we're so glad to have you with us. We hope you join us again next time. This is Gary Byers, Dr. Steve Collins, for Troweling Down Biblical Archaeology for the 21st Century.